Hello and welcome to Tech 5, 5 technology stories I think you should know about. And who am I? I'm Sean Thuras, a software developer in the San Francisco Bay Area where I run a small technology consultancy. Our first story of the week, Facebook is now Meta. Facebook gave a big presentation where they introduced their new corporate identity as Meta, which is based on metaverse. And they gave some ideas of what you could expect. They have an app called Horizon Home that's going to be, I guess, the sort of base station from where your avatar will go off and do other things. Sony had this with PlayStation Home many years ago, although there wasn't a VR aspect to it in the sense that there were no sort of goggles or anything like that. But otherwise, this concept looks quite similar to me. I've watched all these little videos. I'm just not going to play them all right now. I thought one of the interesting ones was, they show that you can use 2D apps in the 3D world. It will sort of look like you're looking at a screen. Well, you will be looking at a screen. Some tools for developers here. And then this is basically Guitar Hero, but actually useful. So you see the alternate reality, the augmented reality, sorry, as you're looking at the keys, you see which ones you should be pressing. So you actually play a real musical instrument instead of pressing colored buttons on a guitar, plastic guitar, a fake plastic guitar. Then they have sort of a teaser for their new VR headset. And they have some filters that they show here, sort of a bit more elaborate than the filters that you would see on, I was going to say Snapchat, but I guess that's old. I guess TikTok would be the comparison. And anyway, they go into some detail here. They say that they're going to use for control of devices, they'll have something that measures electrical impulses around your wrist. So with movements of your hands, they'll be able to tell what gestures you're making. And that will mean you won't necessarily have to hold controllers in your fingers, but rather it just something can monitor the motions of your hands. Here's a little side note to this. There was a company in Arizona that sells laptops and accessories, computer accessories, that already filed for the trademark Meta a few months ago. So I think the upshot of this is that Facebook's going to pay them some small number of millions, and they'll have to change their name to something else. Or in exchange for them changing their name to something else. I suppose they could take it to court, but Facebook has a lot of lawyers. Then there's a discussion of this change by Ben Thompson in his Stratechery blog, where he talks about the comparison with Google's changing its name to Alphabet many years ago. The difference being that they had so many disparate enterprises going that they thought Alphabet would be a good catch-all for them. I think Google sees themselves as sort of the smartest people in the class, and so they thought, well, we don't know, which fields we might go into and dominate at a moment's notice, so we'll just call it Alphabet. Where Facebook here has really gone all in on this metaverse approach. He mentions that several months ago, Microsoft at one of their conferences talked about a metaverse of Internet of Things connected to their cloud service, Azure. And then a month later, at another conference, they talked about the enterprise metaverse. And I love this. As usual, no one cares unless Facebook is involved. It seems that journalists who cover tech really only want to hear about Facebook or Netflix stories. Anything else is dull, seems dull to them. So just going in on that a little bit, Microsoft, theirs is going to be called Mesh, and they're really kind of structuring everything around the Teams app. If you've used Office 365 applications over the past, say, 3 or 4 years, you would see that things went from a certain structure that they had been previously, which was either centered around Outlook or centered around SharePoint sites. It kind of depends on how corporate your corporate IT is, which of those two experiences you would have had. But more recently, everything has been adjusted to work with Teams or work around Teams. So Teams is Zoom, Teams is Slack, and so on. And now they want to expand that with 3D meeting spaces. Microsoft bought AltSpace VR a few years ago, 2017, and I expect that they would incorporate that technology as part of this. Microsoft also has another project called HoloLens, like a hologram, some smart glasses that are intended for use in situations like someone talking someone else through something with a diagram, for example, being able to reference some materials while working hands-on in the real world. There's another photo here. This is a Microsoft mock-up of something that you might be able to do in Teams. Looks like fun. Notice that in Microsoft's VR land, no one has pelvises or legs. I don't know what that's about. And then finally, this series of blog posts, if you're interested in more on this concept of metaverse and how it might be realized over the next few to 15 years. As always, I will have the links in the pinned comment. Okay, that was a big story. Story number 2. The others are all smaller than that. Researchers developed 5D optical data storage method that can preserve up to 500 terabytes per disk. So the curious thing about this, and here I'm at the risk of turning this whole video into Microsoft, and here I'm at risk of turning this whole video into but Microsoft also does this. But I was looking into this. I read this very carefully. It's a bit intense, this article, and I wondered how it was different from the Project Silica that Microsoft introduced or made public a couple of years ago, which is here. Project Silica, it's an ongoing thing. And as it turns out, this new paper, this new experiment that was done, this new method that was developed, and the paper written about it, it turns out that it's essentially the same team at the same university doing something that I was not able to distinguish in any way from what Microsoft did a couple of years ago with the University of Southampton. The 5D comes from the 3 physical dimensions, and the 4th dimension that they are considering here is essentially the polarization of the light. When traveling through certain types of media, light, let's say the light that's going horizontally travels at a very slightly different speed from the light that's traveling, waves that are traveling through vertically. And so the two will be refracted at different angles, and because it will take a tiny bit different amount of time for the light to get through the medium. So And that's the fourth. And then the fifth is the size, basically the size of the pit that's created by this laser. An extremely short burst of laser light into this piece of glass, a femtosecond, which is a quadrillionth of a second. So 1,000th of a trillionth, which in turn is 1,000th of a billion. So it seems that what they've improved in this latest experiment, they've found a way to record these, let's call them pits, although they're inside the glass rather than on the surface. They've figured out how to record them faster than before. So the announcement that Microsoft made a couple of years ago is that they had been able to put all of a movie onto a little piece of glass. Into, I should say. So they digitized the original Superman from 1978 and put it all there, and it looks a little something like this. And they did this in cooperation with Warner Brothers. They didn't just grab a DVD or a Blu-ray and do it. Warner Brothers is involved in this because they are concerned with archiving their own material. As it is these days, if you have something that's archived digitally, you do have to be concerned about what's called bit rot or other things happening. So, for example, if you have a copy of something somewhere, you do have to worry about the warehouse burning down or getting flooded, or a magnetic field in some way passing by and disturbing or erasing the disk. And if you have it recorded on, say, an optical medium like a CD-ROM, you have to be concerned about the plastic in the disk becoming cloudy. You have to be concerned about possibly this happened with some CDs in the early years, so CDs that were produced in like 1981 through 83 or so, especially. Those CDs had a tendency for the aluminum to flake off, which of course destroys the data that's on there. So in order to avoid having to transfer every few years to a fresh hard drive, let's say, if there were a way to encode the data into some physical object that was resistant to heat and moisture and magnetic fields, then you'd have a reference copy of that data that you could come back to anytime and make a fresh copy onto whatever medium is current at the time. So that's what they've done here. And they talk about how they currently, it's curious, I didn't know about this, but currently, let's see, I'm going to bring that up. Yeah. And currently what they do, they record a movie in digital, they complete it, and it's a finalized copy digitally. They make digital copies of that, but just in case, they also make a 3-color breakdown of that onto negatives in black and white, so that they would then bring back the magenta, the cyan, and the yellow, merge them together, and then they would be able to produce film from that. So this is just in case something happens, if there's a huge electromagnetic pulse or something. But if they were able to instead archive this onto glass that could be kept safe somewhere, then they wouldn't need to go through that step, which of course is destructive of the data. If you were to resurrect a digital film using this 3-color negative process, you would have a slightly less perfect copy than you started off with. Personally, and I suggest that you do this as well, every few years I will transfer the data from the hard disk that I'm using to a new one. And don't get rid of the old one until you're sure that the new one is not going to fail right away. And this is in addition to any backup situation, which I do that as well. I back up off-site. I use a backup service. But even just the copy that you have locally, hard drives fail, bits get overwritten a certain number of times, and the medium that they're on gets tired. So, story number 3. So the Juno mission has been circling Jupiter for the past 5 years and has some insights into what's going on in the atmosphere. The peculiar thing about Jupiter is that it is an atmosphere and that's it. As far as we know, there's no sort of clear transition from this is a gas and this is a solid. It may be that there is something relatively solid far down in under immense pressure, more towards the center of the planet. But as far as we can tell, it basically starts off diffuse and just gradually becomes a thicker and thicker gas. So, as you probably remember seeing pictures of Jupiter, there's the Great Red Spot, which is a sort of a permanent storm, a permanent hurricane near the middle latitudes of the planet. And it's been getting smaller over the past couple of decades. The Juno craft, by examining this spot at depth, seems to have found that it goes pretty deep, and that the shrink that we've seen happening on the surface is really just on the surface. It's difficult to learn anything about what's under the visible surface of Jupiter's atmosphere. They believe that these enormous, very fast jet streams that we see creating these bands may extend down 3,000 kilometers. And then also from these observations, they've determined that these cells or storms or cyclones that we see seem to be fairly permanent features of the atmosphere. Sort of like if you have a river that's flowing, there may be an eddy that just spins, that's always there, as long as the banks of the river are the same shape. And further on this, the Juno mission was extended for another 5 years, and so here is an idea of the orbits that it's going to be making. It's going to pass by some of the other planets, pass through the rings, and give us a better idea of what's going on there. We don't know a lot about Jupiter's rings still. All right, story number 4. And this is a peculiar one. So researchers at the San Diego Zoo figured out that 2 of the condors that had been born over the past 20 years had no fathers. And they realized that they were looking at examples of parthenogenesis, which is a birth without requiring a mate. And this happens sometimes in lizards and snakes and sharks and some birds. In snakes, they're always female offspring because the duplicated chromosomes don't work in snakes for males. In condors, it's the reverse. So only male offspring are viable in this case with 2 ZZ chromosomes. Neither of these birds were very healthy. One of them lived to be 2 years old, and the other lived to be 8. But because California condors are very large and very long-lived, neither of them made it to reproductive age. But the scientists consider this a hopeful sign. This may be some other way that they have to bring back the population. The population of these birds got down to something like 25 in 1987, and since then it's back up to 500. But they still would like to see a more robust community of these birds. So there you go. You don't hear about that every day. And finally, Lookout, which is an antivirus company, discovered that there were some apps in the Android App Store that had rootkits in them, which is unusual. It's been a while since that exploit was popular. And this is called AbstractEmu, so continuing our bird theme today. They go into some detail, which I won't attempt to delve into, but they show the icons of these apps that were distributed with this malware inside. And they say that they believe that it's a big organization behind this that's looking to make money from this somehow. You know, we talk about the motivations of hackers. In this case, it looks like these people are trying to probably get bank account details, credit cards, or something like that. The way this works, someone would install the app would do whatever it said it would do, be a flashlight or whatever, but in the background, it was acquiring root access, administrator access, if you will, to your phone. And then it was sending back lots of detail about what was on your phone to a command and control server. That server was taken down as soon as Lookout discovered it, because, of course, you know, they're smart enough to do this. They're smart enough to notice when they're being noticed. And then there's a story about the same thing here that's a bit easier to follow. Fortunately, these have been caught. Let's hope that there aren't others out there. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. And please leave your comments. Let me know what stories you'd like me to cover, what topics you'd like me to do. There's lots of other stuff going on in technology. So if there's something that you're particularly interested in, please let me know. The feedback really helps. All right. Well, I'll see you next time.